So, David, at one time it was almost like there was a data breach every single week. There hasn't been a high-profile one for quite a while, but this time there appears to be some sort of NHS data breach. What's happened?
Well, I mean, the summary is that the NHS are using tracking cookies, which lots of websites do. In and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're using one called Metapixel by Facebook, which is pretty intrusive as these tracking cookies go. It garners a lot of data, but it's not so much that they've used it, it's where they've used it. So the NHS has put these tracking pixels onto really sensitive web pages where you might choose to go for incredibly sensitive medical advice. Like, for example, one of the examples been given is that they just put them on pages that you might go to if your children are talking about transitioning their gender. So this is some of the most sensitive and hot button issues that people dealing with the NHS might face. And obviously the NHS wants to understand how people move around its websites, but people often forget that if you place tracking cookies onto your website, they download people's personal information as part of their operation. They download your IP address, they download information about your computer. And if you start to match that up with where people have gone on your websites, especially if you run incredibly sensitive medical websites, that actually tells Facebook in America a great deal of really personal information about people that perhaps you probably shouldn't have recorded. So I think the difficulty here, and this is a common problem, is that people download analytical cookie systems for initially quite valid reasons. Well, I mean, you want to understand how people are using your web pages, and whether you need to have more of them or less of them, or if the content needs to be different. And then they either extend them. I saw someone recently who had used Google's version of this, Google Analytics, and had their proper cookie control windows and all the rest of it, and were complying with the law. And then they'd also, without telling anybody, someone in their IT department had installed the Facebook Metapixel system, and it wasn't mentioned on the cookie control, so actually it was unlawful. So people sometimes extend its use, but then also you have this kind of NHS example where they're using it in ways that, when you start to think about it, are actually deeply inappropriate. And I think the problem here is that people often use tracking technology and in place on their entire website without necessarily thinking about, or thinking very carefully about, what people might be able to derive from that data.
And you've mentioned really sensitive information a couple of times there. Is medical information more sensitive than, I don't know, perhaps phone number, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the GDPR splits data into ordinary personal data. And amusingly, lots of people think that financial data is particularly sensitive with the GDPR. It's not. It's actually classed as ordinary personal data. But obviously, we have a spectrum. But then it has something called especially sensitive data. It used to be called special category data, but highly sensitive personal data. And that includes all health data, data about sexuality, about gender. So you can already see that I've named areas that are particularly sensitive. It also includes, for example, trade union membership. So if a trade union had tracking pixels on its website, that would actually be a matter of some concern, because it would allow people to identify who was a trade union member. So there are lots of areas that come up, and this kind of very sensitive data isn't supposed to be exported without explicit consent, and even then, real care should be taken when dealing with it.
And so you've probably explained here a number of things that businesses didn't even realize that they may have as a consideration, something that they need to think about. How can you and the data protection team help businesses, well, to be compliant?
Yeah, I mean, we can advise people where we've done all of this kind of work, as I've already alluded to, and we're more than happy to have open conversations with people and look at their websites and tell them where we have areas that are concerning and what they can and can't do. And indeed, we're often consulted with a sort of, can I do this? Can I do that? What can't I do type question? And that's the kind of thing we're very used to answering.